My name is Vorok Sel, Senior Tactical Observer, 3rd Fleet of the Dominion of Galveth. I have served 42 rotations across 6 star systems. I have watched civilizations rise, collapse, beg for mercy, and occasionally surprise me. But nothing, and I want to be very precise here, nothing in my 42 rotations prepared me for what the humans did. Let me start from the beginning, because this story deserves a proper beginning. The year was 2187 by human reckoning. The Galveth Dominion had been watching the humans for approximately 60 of their years. Standard observation protocol. We had a file on them. A thin file, embarrassingly thin, actually. Thin enough that our analysts used it as a joke. You want to know what was in that file? Species Homo sapiens. Planet Sol 3, referred to by inhabitants as Earth. Notable traits: fragile skeletal structure, no natural armor, no venom, no enhanced sensory apparatus, no regenerative capacity, average lifespan of approximately 80 rotations. Technological development, moderate. Military threat assessment, negligible. Negligible. That word, I will never use it again. The humans were invited into the Galveth Coalition under what our High Command called the Charity Extension. That is exactly what it sounds like. We felt sorry for them. The Vreth Collective had been making aggressive expansions toward the Outer Rim, and Sol 3 was in the path. Our council voted, and by a margin of 11-3, decided to offer humanity a place inside our protective boundary. Protective boundary. As if we were doing them a favor. The lead diplomat sent to Earth was a Galveth named Counselor Draven Koss. Tall, gray-scaled, with 4 eyes and the kind of calm confidence that comes from representing the dominant military power in 3 sectors. He landed on Earth in Washington, and the humans met him with something called a press conference. Hundreds of their small recording devices. Noise, flashing lights, absolutely zero formal structure. Draven Koss later filed a report that described the experience as, and I am quoting directly here, aggressively chaotic and somehow also deeply underwhelming. The humans smiled at him. They smiled, like we were not an interstellar military power offering them the single greatest diplomatic gift in their species' history. They smiled, asked him if he wanted something called coffee, and then one of their smaller humans, a child apparently, waved at him from behind a barrier. He did not know what to do with any of that. The terms of entry into the coalition were standard: economic access, shared intelligence, technology exchange, and military contribution. Every species contributed forces to the joint Galveth Coalition army. The Vreth were coming, and we needed numbers. When our military liaison, Commander Ovek Thal, arrived to assess what humanity could contribute, he was not optimistic. They are soft, he told me over a communications channel, 3 days after landing. Physically, they are the softest species I have ever catalogued, softer than the Malari, and the Malari are essentially mobile water sacs. How soft? I asked. Sel, he said, and I could hear the genuine confusion in his voice. Their bones break. They break, Sel. You apply sustained pressure, and the structural supports of their body simply. All bones break under sufficient force, I pointed out. Theirs break under insufficient force. I did not argue. Our medical files confirmed it. Humans fractured under impacts that would leave a Galveth mildly irritated. They bruised, they bled from the outside, which was deeply unsettling to every species that witnessed it for the first time. They overheated in environments that our soldiers considered comfortable. They froze in temperatures that our soldiers considered brisk. What is their military like? I asked. Ovek Thal was quiet for a moment. That, he said carefully, is where it gets complicated. He sent me footage, and I watched it with the detached professionalism of a senior tactical observer who has seen everything. I watched it 4 times. Then I called Ovek Thal back. Are they doing that on purpose? I asked. Yes, he said. And they survive? Most of them. Most. Yes, Sel. Most. What I had watched was a human military training exercise, and the reason I watched it 4 times was not because it was impressive, at least not at first. It was because I genuinely could not understand what I was looking at. They were throwing themselves off structures. Voluntarily. They were submerging in freezing water and timing how long they could remain functional. They were running for hours, not sprinting, not moving in efficient tactical bursts, but running, continuously over broken terrain, carrying weight that would strain a mid-grade Galveth soldier. When they fell, they got up. When they were hit, they gritted their teeth, which is apparently a stress response involving jaw muscles, and they kept moving. They train like this regularly? I asked. This is considered entry level, Ovek Thal said. Entry. For a specific subcategory of soldier they refer to as special operations. The average infantry soldier trains differently. Less intense, they say, relatively speaking. What does relatively mean in this context? It means I watched a standard human soldier complete an obstacle course with a broken finger and not report it until the exercise was over because, and I quote the medical report here, he did not want to slow his unit down. There was a long silence on the line. They are aware, I said slowly, that they are by every measurable biological metric the most fragile sapient species in the coalition? Completely aware, Ovekthal said. They seem to find it funny. That should have been the first warning. The laughing. Humans laugh at things that would cause other species to file formal psychological distress reports. They laugh at danger. They laugh at pain. They tell stories about nearly dying and punctuate them with a sound that is biologically indistinguishable from joy. I reviewed 300 hours of human entertainment media as part of my observer duties. A significant portion of it involved humans deliberately placing themselves in dangerous situations for fun, no survival benefit, no resource gain, pure enjoyment of the risk itself. One program showed humans jumping out of functioning aircraft with only thin fabric canopies to slow their descent. Another showed humans climbing vertical rock faces with no mechanical assistance whatsoever. Another, and this one I had to watch twice because I assumed it was fictional, showed humans running deliberately toward large, aggressive, multi-ton land animals. For sport, I filed a report to High Command that included the phrase psychological profile remains inconclusive, which is the professional way of saying we have absolutely no framework for understanding these beings. The formal integration of human forces into the coalition army began 6 months after the initial diplomatic contact. They sent us 400 soldiers for the first joint training exercise on the Galveth military station of Veldoru, high orbit above the gas giant Thesson 4. 400 soldiers. We had approximately 14,000 coalition troops on that station from 8 different species. The Malari representatives, the water sack people Ovekthal had mentioned, watched the human transport dock with what I can only describe as polite concern. Their commanding officer, a gelatinous figure named Poro Leth, turned to me as the first humans walked down the boarding ramp and said, very quietly, "Are they well? They look unfinished." And I understood the reaction. By coalition standards, the humans looked wrong. Too small, most of them. 2 arms, 2 legs, flat faces, forward-facing eyes, no secondary limbs, no carapace, no tail for balance, exposed skin, soft, rounded at the edges in ways that made experienced soldiers instinctively uncomfortable because everything about their form screamed prey animal, and yet they were walking onto a military station like they owned it. The human commanding officer stepped forward. His name was Captain Dario Vasquez. He was not the tallest human, not the broadest, not anything that would register as impressive by coalition standards. Medium height, dark hair going slightly gray at the edges, a calm expression that I would later learn to recognize as specifically human resting readiness. Not relaxed, not tense, somewhere between the two that most species did not have a word for. He looked at the assembled coalition welcoming committee. 4 different species, all considerably larger and more physically imposing than any human present. He smiled. "Hell of a station," he said. "Who do we talk to about getting on the range?" Our weapons range coordinator, a Galveth named Brexall, blinked all 4 eyes in sequence. "You want to train immediately? We've been on a transport for 11 days, Vasquez said. "My people need to move." Brexall looked at me. I looked at Brexall. We had both read the human file. We had both processed the medical assessments. We both knew, intellectually, what the humans were. Negligible. "Of course," Brexall said. He gave them access to Range 7, the oldest range on the station, the one we typically used for orientation simulations, easy settings, controlled environment, the kind of range we sent new recruits to so they could feel confident before seeing a real combat scenario. What happened on Range 7 over the next 3 hours was not something Brexall or I could have predicted. The humans did not use it like an orientation range. They turned off the guidance protocols. They removed the safety dampeners, which required a formal waiver that Vask signed without reading for more than 10 seconds. They set the difficulty to parameters that Brexall initially assumed was a data entry error. Then they ran it. Not once. 6 times. By the 3rd run, they had started making it harder. Not by adjusting settings, but by adding their own constraints. Moving backward. Covering their own eyes for segments. Calling out restrictions to each other in rapid-fire language that our translation systems caught as things like left hand only, and you have 5 seconds, and go. Brexall called me from the observation room above the range. Cell, he said. I know, I said. I was already watching the feed. Are they doing that on purpose? Yes, I said. Why? I did not have an answer for that. Not yet. But I was starting to suspect that our file on humanity needed to be significantly thicker. I was starting to suspect, with the particular feeling in my lower chest that I have learned over 42 rotations to take seriously, that we had made a very specific kind of mistake. Not the kind where you underestimate a threat, the other kind. The kind where you underestimate an ally. And somewhere on Range 7, Captain Dario Vasquez wiped sweat from his face, looked at the scoreboard showing his unit's time, made a sound that our translation systems identified as laughter, and said to his soldiers, "Again, I want you to understand something before I continue. I am not a being who startles easily. I have watched Galveth warships tear holes in orbital defense grids. I have reviewed footage of the Vreth Collective consuming an entire moon base in under 4 hours. I have seen things that made younger officers request reassignment to administrative posts where the most dangerous thing they might encounter is a filing discrepancy. I do not startle, but the humans made me startle. Twice, and the second time I am not ashamed to admit. I gripped the edge of my console hard enough to leave marks in the metal. This is the rest of the story. The joint training on Veldoru continued for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, the coalition forces from 8 different species went through standard combat integration drills, team movements, coordinated fire exercises, communication protocols across language barriers, standard procedure. We had done this with every new species that joined the coalition. The humans participated in all of it. What they also did, which was not standard procedure, was talk to everyone, every species, every unit, every soldier who would give them 5 minutes. The Malari, who were gentle, highly intelligent, and deeply uncomfortable with physical confrontation, found the humans completely fascinating because the humans asked them questions. Not tactical questions, personal questions. Where are you from? What does your homeworld smell like? What do you do when you are not a soldier? Do you have family? One of the human soldiers, a tall woman named Sergeant Kaya Oron, spent 2 evenings sitting with a group of Malari engineers, learning approximately 40 words of their language and mispronouncing all of them in ways that the Malari found so genuinely charming that 3 of them requested she be assigned to their technical unit permanently. The Dreth Kale, massive insectoid warriors from the Outer Rim who communicated primarily through vibration, and had a cultural tradition of acknowledging only those who had proven themselves in physical contest, initially ignored the humans entirely, completely. They walked past them in corridors without a flicker of acknowledgement. They did not share meal periods with them. They did not respond to greetings. This lasted exactly 9 days. On the 9th day, one of the human soldiers, a compact, quiet man named Corporal Bento Figara, walked up to the Drakal commanding warrior, whose name translated roughly as Iron Tooth of the Third Hatch, and challenged him to a strength contest. I was not there. I reviewed the footage later. The Draconis warrior was approximately 3 times the mass of Bento Figara. His exoskeleton alone outweighed the human by a considerable margin. The contest, which involved lifting a standardized loading unit used in the station cargo bays, was not close. Iron Tooth lifted it with 1 limb. Bento Figara lifted it with both arms, barely, and held it for exactly 4 seconds before setting it down. Then Bento Figara looked up at the Drakal warrior and grinned, and the Drethkale warrior, after a moment of what I can only describe as baffled recalibration, vibrated in a pattern that our translators identified as laughter. From that point forward, the Drakal and the humans ate together every single meal period. I do not fully understand what happened in those 9 days and then that one contest, but I have thought about it many times since, and I believe the humans understood something that our integration protocols had never accounted for. Respect, among warriors, is not given, it is shown, and showing up to a contest you cannot win, and losing without flinching is, apparently, one of the fastest ways to earn it. The humans were building something on that station, quietly, without a formal directive or a strategic memo. They were weaving themselves into the coalition, not through impressive statistics or tactical demonstrations, but through the oldest mechanism in their species' history, connection. I filed another report to High Command. This one included the phrase social integration capacity, exceptional. I also included a personal note, which I rarely do, suggesting that our analyst review the human file again with fresh parameters. High Command acknowledged the report. Then the Vreth arrived early. The alert came at 034 station time. 3 Vreth collective warships had dropped out of transit drive at the edge of the Thesson system, moving on an intercept course toward Veldoru. Not a scouting party, not a probe. 3 full warships, each carrying approximately 800 Vreth combat units, meaning we were looking at a potential boarding action against a station of 14,000, which sounds like favorable odds until you understand what Vreth combat units are. The Vreth Collective does not breed soldiers, it grows them. Vreth combat units are engineered organisms, each one approximately 2 meters of dense armored aggressive biological machinery, with no pain response, no individual survival instinct, and no capacity for surrender because surrender requires a concept of self-preservation, and they simply do not have one. They are not brave, bravery requires fear. They have no fear to overcome, they just come, and come, and come. Our defensive response was standard: seal internal sections, move civilians to protected cores, position combat units at all probable boarding entry points. The Galveth forces, the Drethkal, the Malari technical units moving to defensive support positions. All of it began executing with the precision of a coalition that had trained for exactly this scenario. What was not standard was the human response. Captain Vasquez was in the command center when the alert hit. I was there. I watched him receive the tactical data, review the Vreth positions, and assess the boarding probability projection, which our systems put at 73% for at least one hull breach within 40 minutes. He looked at the projection for approximately 4 seconds. Then he turned to his senior sergeant, a big-shouldered man named First Sergeant Damo Price, and said, very calmly, "Get everyone up, full kit. We are not waiting at the doors." Price, who I had observed over 3 weeks and identified as the kind of soldier that other soldiers watched to calibrate their own reactions, simply nodded once and left the room without a word. I turned to Vask. "Captain, standard protocol positions defensive units at breach points. You will receive coordinate assignments shortly." Vexes looked at me with an expression I had not yet learned to read. "Voraxel, how long have the Vreth been fighting?" I blinked. "Centuries by their reckoning. And in that time," he said, "has waiting at the door ever stopped them?" I did not answer, because the answer was, occasionally, partially, not consistently. "We are not waiting at the door," he said again, and then he left to join his soldiers. What the humans did in the next 37 minutes was not in any coalition tactical manual. I have checked, multiple times. I had our analyst check. There is no formal doctrine anywhere in Galveth military history that describes it, because it requires something that frankly we had never considered a viable combat philosophy before. It requires not caring about the odds in the specific way that humans do not care about odds. The first Vreth breach came at point 7 of the outer hull, which our projections had rated as a 41% probability site. A secondary breach point. Lower priority. We had stationed 1 Drethkale unit there, 8 warriors as a secondary holding force. The Vreth hit that point with 120 units. 8 versus 120. The Drethkale held for 4 minutes, which is extraordinary. Genuinely extraordinary, and I want to be clear about that because the Drethkale are exceptional soldiers, and 4 minutes against those numbers is a testament to everything they are. But 4 minutes was ending, and the Vreth were pushing through. The humans hit them from behind. Vax had not waited for the breach. He had positioned his 400 soldiers in the corridors before the hull failed. Not at the breach points but offset, in the connecting passages, in the maintenance shafts, in positions that our tactical system had not flagged as relevant, because they were not defensive positions. They were flanking positions. When the Vreth pushed through the breach and into the corridor, expecting to drive forward into prepared defenders, they ran directly into 400 humans coming at them sideways. I was watching the internal sensor feed, and what I saw in that corridor is something I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count, not because it was clean or elegant or tactically perfect, because it was none of those things. It was loud and close and brutal, and it went on far longer than any engagement at those numbers should have continued. But the humans did not stop. That is the thing. That is the thing I keep returning to. The Vreth do not stop because they cannot. They have no mechanism for stopping. They were engineered without one. The humans did not stop because they chose not to, and there is a difference. I have come to understand that matters enormously, because a thing that cannot stop is predictable. You can account for it, route around it, contain it, outlast it. A thing that will not stop is something else entirely. Corporal Bento Fagara, the same man who had lost a strength contest to Iron Tooth 9 days earlier and grinned about it, took a Vreth strike to the left side of his torso in the first 90 seconds of contact. Our medical sensors logged it as 2 fractured ribs and significant soft tissue trauma. He kept fighting for 22 minutes. Sergeant Kaya Oran, who had spent 2 evenings learning 40 words of Malari language and mispronouncing all of them, coordinated a 6-person team that sealed a secondary breach using equipment that was not designed for that purpose, improvised in real time, under fire, while maintaining radio contact with 3 other human units simultaneously. First Sergeant Damo Price, at one point, with the sensor logs confirming this and I have reviewed them to be certain, carried a wounded Drethkal warrior, a being 3 times his mass, approximately 40 meters through an active combat corridor to a protected medical station, then went back. He went back. The Galveth forces were holding the primary breach points with discipline and precision. The Drethkal were doing what the Drethkal do, which is magnificent and ferocious and exactly what their centuries of warrior culture had built them to do. The Malari technical teams were rerouting power systems to reinforce hull integrity from the secondary breach, working faster under fire than our engineers had ever tested them. But the humans were everywhere. That is the only way I can describe it. They were everywhere that the tactical grid said no one should be. They were in the gaps. They were in the places where the plan had not accounted for what actually happened. And wherever there was a gap, wherever the Vreth had found an angle that our defense had not fully sealed, there was a human coming from a direction that made no tactical sense and somehow working anyway. At 0417 station time, 37 minutes after the first alert, all 3 Vreth warships disengaged. Not destroyed, not disabled, disengaged. The Vreth Collective does not disengage. That is also in the file. A Vreth assault commits fully, or it does not begin. The tactical calculus is simple. They calculate losses against projected gain, and if the gain is achievable, they sustain any loss necessary to achieve it. They disengaged. Our analysts spent 2 days working out why. The conclusion they reached was this. The Vreth Tactical Intelligence, the collective processing system that directs their combat units, had assessed the engagement and could not produce a reliable projection for completion. Not because our forces were too strong. Our forces were strong. But the Vreth had faced equivalent coalition resistance before. It was the unpredictability. The Vreth can model pain response. They can model self-preservation instinct. They can calculate when a defender will break, fall back, prioritize survival. Their entire tactical system is built on those calculations. They cannot model a species that registers an injury, acknowledges the injury and then makes a conscious decision to continue anyway. They cannot calculate the human variable. They tried for 37 minutes, sustained losses that their own projections had rated as unacceptable given the tactical output, and then did something they have not done in recorded military history. They left, because they did not understand what they were fighting. The debrief the following morning was one of the quieter rooms I have sat in during my career. Commanders from 8 species, some of us still processing the sensor data, some of us looking at the casualty reports, some of us, and I include myself here, looking at the human officers across the table and doing a quiet reassessment of everything we thought we knew. Captain Vasquez sat at the table with a bandaged left hand which he had apparently not mentioned to medical staff until after the debrief was scheduled. Price had 3 separate wound treatments visible on his arms and neck, all of them sealed and apparently no longer worth discussing. Oran was running on what our station systems estimated was less than 2 hours of sleep and looked completely ready to have a normal conversation about anything at all. The Draconi commander Iron Tooth of the 3rd hatch spoke first. He looked at Bento Figara across the table. Figara, ribs fractured, movement careful but expression entirely unbothered, met his eyes. Iron Tooth vibrated. Our translators took a moment, then the translation came through. Small one carried no armor, small one did not stop. Figara shrugged, which is a human gesture I had by then learned to read as a kind of deliberate reduction of something significant. Stopping seemed like a bad idea at the time. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Iron Tooth vibrated again, longer this time, and the translator produced, the Dracale name a warrior once in a generation. We name them in the old tongue. The naming requires a story worth telling. He looked around the room, then back at the humans. This station has 400 stories worth telling. Vax looked at Iron Tooth. He had that expression again, the one I had been learning to read over weeks and had finally identified that morning while reviewing the engagement footage. It was the expression humans make when they are moved by something and have chosen not to show the full extent of it. We are honored, Vaxes said, quietly. I filed my final report on the Veldoru engagement that afternoon. It was the longest report I have written in 42 rotations. I included every sensor log, every medical record, every tactical anomaly. I included Price going back. I included Figara's 22 minutes. I included the Vreth disengagement and our analysts' conclusions. And at the end in the section marked Observer Assessment, I wrote something that I had never written before in 42 rotations, and that I suspect no Galveth tactical observer had ever written before me. I wrote, "Recommend immediate reclassification of human military threat assessment from negligible to undefined. Current coalition taxonomies do not contain an appropriate category. The species does not lack strength. It lacks the biological mechanisms that limit the application of strength in other species. Pain, fear, statistical probability, personal survival calculus, these are not absent in humans. They simply do not function as hard stops. They function as information that the human soldier receives, processes, and then decides what to do with. This distinction is not a minor biological footnote. It is, in the assessment of this observer, the single most significant tactical variable the Galveth Dominion has encountered in 3 centuries of coalition warfare. I submitted the report. High Command responded within 2 hours, which is extremely fast for High Command. The response contained 3 words: expand the recruitment. 3 months later, Veldoru Station received a new intake. Not 400 humans this time. 4,000. I was at the docking bay when the first transport came in. I watched them walk down the ramp in their units carrying their equipment, talking to each other and laughing about something I could not hear. Soft, rounded at the edges, no armor on their bodies, no natural weapons, fragile bones, exposed skin, absolutely negligible. Captain Vasquez was standing beside me. He had been promoted. The insignia on his uniform was new enough that it still looked slightly stiff. "Ready for round 2? I asked him. He looked at the incoming soldiers. He had that expression again, the contained one. "Voraxel," he said. "We were born ready. That's kind of the whole problem." He said it without ego, without performance, simply as a statement of fact, offered to the universe without particular urgency, the way you might describe the weather or the temperature of a room. And I stood there on the docking bay of Veldoru Station, 42 rotations of experience behind me, 6 star systems in my memory, and I thought, yes, that is exactly the whole problem. And for the first time since I began this assignment, watching humanity's transports fill the docking bay one after another, I was very, very glad they were on our side.